And welcome everyone. We're back, and JC was bored, and JC came and said, "Hey Lloyd, can we do a stream today about the apocryphal sources of the Quran?" And I said yes. So here we are. JC, that's my story, and I am sticking by it. What's your story?
My story is exactly the same. I concur.
Okay, so JC concurs, and we're going to be talking about the sources of the Quran, right? And these sources are all, as you know, apocryphal. So we've been working with Usama. I did invite him, as well as a couple of other guys. We'll see if they do show up. Hello, Just Janice. Yeah, but we've spoken with a handful of guys. Let's hope they show. So we've been using the book by Tisdall, right? The original sources of the Quran by St. Clair Tisdall. And we've been working with Usama on this on Tuesdays. We'll get back to it again next week. While we also work on the Throne of Allah. Oh, here's Paul. Amazing. Awesome. Hello, Paul.
Hi. Have a good holiday.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine. It's
Yes.
And your camera, what is this? What kind of voodoo is this, Paul?
No, it's the same old camera. It's just yeah.
Well, right now it looks pretty good. Let's just get a good look at it. Oh, right now it looks pretty good in the background. It's very English, medieval, and very Victorian and stylish, you know.
Oh, it's just where I do my thing, my man cave.
Yeah, no, it looks good. I mean, look at my little cave here. You know, it's got my wife's plushie toys there, man, which is kind of, you know, that's not a win, you
know. You started something?
We have.
Okay,
We're talking about the apocryphal sources of the Quran. We've done, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 episodes already with Usama. And I'm just on the very last page of Tisdall's book on the sources of the Quran. And he's been going through the Zoroastrian, pagan, and Jewish sources. And after this page, we're heading to the Christian sources.
Okay, cool.
So there's obviously this book by Tisdall. Actually, it's page 137. Let me go here. So just so for those who don't know, who might find this useful, this is the original sources of the Quran by Reverend W. St. Clair Tisdall. And this is a reprint of the 1905 edition. So this goes back well over a century. And there are other sources like this as well, especially amongst the German and English scholars. For instance, there's this one I'd also like to get to, the Bible, the Quran, and the Talmud, or Biblical Legends of the Muslims, compiled from Arabic sources and compared with the Jewish traditions. And that's by Dr. G. Weil, librarian of the University of Heidelberg. And so, yeah, this would also be very interesting because he covers much of the same content. But I think this will be interesting to see where these books take us. Any thoughts on this topic, Paul? And also, I watched your, there was a talk you did probably some time ago with Jay Smith. It was really good.
Okay. Must have been quite a long time ago then. I haven't been invited onto Jay Smith's channel for quite a long time. But,
yeah, maybe so, but you presented really well. So I'm glad your book's coming out, and hopefully you can do the same. You know, we'd love to have that. So any thoughts on these?
I think that this Tisdall book is available online somewhere. I know that I have it, and I didn't buy it, so it's free if you can find it. If you search for it and maybe add the words PDF. I think
it is. They're actually very pretty sources as well. I mean, much more professional than this. I just prefer to go to like older original sources that most likely have not been tampered with or updated or wokified or anything like that. So yeah, let's just dive into this, right? So the Quran contains numbers of legends, apocryphal stories, things which are known as children's tales, and so on, that somehow Muhammad included in the Quran as revelation directly from Allah. Now, for instance, they speak here that people acquainted with Christianity and Judaism, and these men exercised no slight influence over Muhammad during his early years as a prophet, and even before. Zayd, his adopted son, was a Syrian according to Ibn Hisham, and must therefore have been at first a professed Christian. Right? And then also there were others who might have obtained information regarding Jewish, Christian, and Zoroastrian faiths. and the passages borrowed from such sources are so disguised in form that it is quite possible that those from whom Muhammad made his inquiries may not have recognized the deception. And also, if Muhammad adroitly employed this information, he obtained it from men in such a manner as to deceive them, though he could not deceive his enemies. Despairing of the silence from the latter, he finally turned upon his enemies, those who recognized that he was simply taking legends and putting them in as the revelation of Allah, and he turned on them with the sword. Any comments on that before I move to the Christian section?
Well, the Quran clearly engages with a vast array of pre-Quranic material, Bible stories, apocryphal stories, and so on and so forth. I'm not completely on board with this. He was passing them off as completely original. And if you take the Bible stories, he frequently refers, whoever wrote the Quran, frequently refers to the Torah and the Injil. And I think on at least one occasion, he reports back that this is what happened. That these are Bible stories. If, for example, one takes the companions in the cave, the seven sleepers of Ephesus, and he refers to how Christians built a chapel on the site and how they disagree about how many people were amongst them, whether there were seven or whether there was some other number. So I don't think the Quran is necessarily passing everything off as original. The mere fact that it alludes to a story doesn't mean that that he was passing it off as something that was completely new to him. The other little factor is a lot of the time he doesn't tell the stories in a very full way. It
talks about them, it like mentions snippets of them as if it's known and is discussing it in some context.
Yeah, so nobody really knows who Luqman is, and no one's really too sure about the camel. Sally and the camel, but we do know that that he assumes, whoever wrote it assumes, that the audience already know the story. So I'll wait and see where we're going with this, but I wouldn't assume that just because there's a pre-Islamic story and it appears in the Quran that necessarily there's dishonesty or subterfuge. The guy is just telling a story, isn't he? Or he's alluding to a story a lot of the time.
Right. So, chapter 4, the influence of Christianity and Christian apocryphal books. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not to say that I agree with every conclusion that Tisdall makes, but he's also drawing on scholarship that goes back even a century before him, right? The best sources of these that I know of are German and English sources, although according to Odon, there's some very good French sources. So, unfortunately, we tend to be restricted to sources in the languages that we are familiar with. I know, for instance, there's some fantastic archives in Turkish, and so on. So yeah, we need to start looking at other languages as well. Even Dutch, I've discovered some great sources. But let's have a look. So when Muhammad arose, Christianity had not obtained any very considerable hold upon the Arabs. By the way, to finish my thought, so I don't necessarily agree with every conclusion. I think today in the age of the internet has added 10 points of IQ to everybody, simply because we have access to better information.
I'm not sure I would agree with that. I'm not sure people are more intelligent in the interweb age than they were beforehand. I look at old quiz programs from the 1970s, and you have there people introducing themselves as plumbers' mates and answering the most incredible questions. But,
I mean, look, you can look at Civil War era soldiers with a third grade education who are writing at the standard of Harvard professors of English. And then you look at Harvard graduates today, and these people can barely speak basic English. I mean, it's crazy. So yeah, but
the criteria for becoming a professor of sociology in Cambridge University is apparently 2 GCSEs. I don't know if you know what a GCSE is. It's kind of the thing you do when you're 13 or 14, and one of them in PE and one. So yeah, standards. People are not. We have a generation now that has almost a sum total of human knowledge freely and instantly available in the palm of their hands. do people know more now? Are they more intelligent now?
Well, yeah,
I'm not sure.
I had a series recently that I showed Sunday past saying that, yeah, talking about Britain, maybe it's time to call it our day.
Yes, very good.
Yeah, so, but we do have access to better information now than before. We have access to cumulatively a lot more information. So I think those of us who take the time to research, we can draw some better conclusions. We have the benefit of 2 centuries of research going back, right? So after 5 centuries of Christian evangelization, we can point to but a sprinkling here and there of Christian converts. The Banu Harith of Najran, the Banu Hanifa of Yamama, some of the Banu Tay at Tema, and hardly any more. In his youth, we are told Muhammad heard the preaching of Qus, the bishop of Najran, and he met many monks and saw much of the professing Christians when he visited Syria as a trader. Now, all of those stories of Muhammad visiting Syria seem to be, shall we say, a little fishy, right? Because there's stories of monks recognizing him and getting up and going, oh my God, you're the man we read about in the Bible, the man who was prophesied. And they see there's a toad growing on his back, and they say, the toad growing out of your back, that is a sign of and there's an apple growing on his big toe, and that is a sign of, whatever, man. Somehow I think that Muhammad was deformed, and they were trying to explain away these deformities when you read some of the Sirah accounts. JC, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I'd say that also I would not agree with everything that he says, but for a book that was written over 100 years ago, he gets solidly over 90% of it right. And it's not only a time before he had the internet and he could actually converse with lots of people. This is before airplanes, so he wouldn't even travel, and he got so much right that, credit where credit is due. This is phenomenal work, and a lot of the things that he wrote we are rediscovering now. So absolutely a fantastic piece of work.
Yeah, no, it is pretty good. I mean, it's really complete. So what Muhammad
it's a good read. I encourage everybody to read it.
Yeah, I've been through it a few times, and I'm actually happy to be doing it on the channel as well, because it's actually really, I'm always impressed with the scholarship that I find from like 200 years ago. It's crazy how good some of this stuff is, and why is it not common use today, So what Muhammad and his caliphs found in all directions, where their scimitars cut a path for them, says Isaac Taylor, speaking of a somewhat later period in words which describe Muhammad's early experience also. And this apparently is a book called Ancient Christianity, Volume 1. And I'm not saying I agree with Mr. Isaac Taylor here, because he seems to not really like Christianity very much. And he says that what Muhammad found as he was cutting a path through wherever, come on, great. Let me just, for some reason, my PDF just decided to die. That was quite unexpected. And here we're back.
Nice picture of Mecca you've got there.
Yeah. This is the south of Mecca. This is the fruit growing region of Mecca, and then the ships where they caught the fish all went over here to catch this is for the fishermen of Mecca. Yep, that's the one. Brief. So let me get back to where I was. I have no idea what happened to my PDF. We write, speaking of a period in which nevertheless describe Muhammad's early experiences also. It's going to give me a hard time. The superstition.
His scimitar was cutting a path for him.
Yes, cutting a path. Yeah, for the Muslims. Yeah, so they realized it wasn't a religion of peace. And Muhammad found a superstition so abject, an idolatry so gross and shameless, church doctrines so arrogant, church practices so dissolute and so puerile, that the strong-minded Arabians felt themselves inspired anew as God's messengers to reprove the errors of the world and authorized as God's avengers to punish apostate Christendom. Yeah, I don't think this guy really likes Christianity very much, but fine. Seems to have a very negative image. But the Greek monk who wrote the history of the martyrdom of Athanasius the Persian, speaking of the sufferings inflicted on the peoples of Palestine when it was for a brief space in the hands of the Persians in Muhammad's time, draws a fearful picture of the wickedness of the professing Christians there, and does not hesitate to say that it was for this reason that God gave them over to the cruelty of their Zoroastrian persecutors. Yeah, so during this century, true religion lay buried under a senseless mass of superstitions and was unable to raise her head. Right? The earlier Christians had worshipped only God and his Son, but those called Christians in this century worshipped the wood of a cross, the images of early holy men, and the bones of dubious origin. So yeah, whatever. I'm not saying I agree with any of this. This is just what he writes, right? So anywho, I think he's taking a chance. This is his opportunity to take pot shots and push his own particular worldview here. So the picture of Christianity in which the Quran presents shows us what conception of it Muhammad had formed from his own limited experience. His knowledge of the faith was at least powerfully affected by the teaching of the so-called Orthodox party. I do want to raise something here. Now, because there's a couple of documents I want to discuss on the channel in the future. There's a couple of these on studies of, this is the Quranic Jesus, a study of parallels with non-biblical texts, right, from Western Michigan University by Brian C. Bradford. And I've got another that discusses early Christianity in Arabia. And I think these would be well worth discussing. Some great papers. The one is from the 60s, I believe. This one is more recent. It's 2013. Yeah. Any thoughts so far as I go? As we are here now, Paul?
No, I think so. Oh, the bit about punishing sinfulness, I think it's there's a tendency to get this, for people to misunderstand this, in my opinion, or at least to perhaps not misunderstand it, but to fail to fully appreciate what's going on. If you read the Bible, particularly say the prophets Isaiah or Jeremiah or someone like that, they will depict bad things that are happening to the people of Israel as a judgment of God on their sinfulness. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Israelites were the most sinful people in the world at that time. What it means is that there was a prophet there who was calling them to ever higher standards, and was and this motif that bad things happen to you is because you haven't been good enough, doesn't mean that you're particularly wicked. It just means that the prophet is holding that people to a very high standard, I think. And similarly, when the first of all, the Persians take over the East, and then the Arabs take over from the Persians and the Romans, and you get these apocalypses. It doesnn necessarily mean that people are the most wicked, evil. But often they will simply it means there's somebody out there who wants to hold people to a very high standard and wants people to pray more and do more good works, which isn't a bad thing. And they will say, well, look at all these terrible things that have happened. That's God's judgment on us for not being good enough. I think there's a danger sometimes, and this is particularly so, I think, with the Quran, when it talks about the people of the children, the Banu Israel, the children of Israel, and people read it as though it's the author of the Quran really hates Jews because he says all these terrible things about the Jewish people. But to my mind, the Quran author is borrowing this idea, this way of thinking, and and if you ask, if you were able to ask,
just be that they're victim blaming, they're simply exaggerating an issue so they can attack these people and justify it.
I think it's slightly different. In my opinion, it's the Quran author saw himself as an Old Testament style prophet. He saw himself as a new Isaiah or Jeremiah or someone like that, Moses more than anyone, and he was telling people, the children of Israel have all been punished by God for their sinfulness.
Yeah, that's
but I think
styling oneself as an Old Testament prophet is an old motif. I mean, you can go through any number of sects that do that. In fact, Martin Luther styled himself as more than one prophet. One specifically that he did style himself as is Elijah. So, or Elias as they call it, but Elijah, he did style himself as a prophet. And he styled himself, in fact, in one or two cases as superior to the apostles. Or on par with the apostles. So so you get many people that have styled themselves as prophets so that they can justify their position. Yeah.
I think that if you were to ask the author of the Quran, if you'd been in that situation, somebody put their hand up at the back of the class or the back of the mosque and said something like, "Oh, well, what should we do then?" I think he would have said, "Oh, you stick to the law, stick to the Old Testament law." I think he wanted more sacrifices at the Jerusalem temple. He wanted people to be stricter on
but that's neither
make pilgrimages and give a bit of money to the poor and that sort of thing. I don't think he hated the Jews for being Jews, and I don't think he was lambasting them.
Well, I mean, look, there's also without spending the next 45 minutes going off track from the book.
Okay, fair enough.
You know, there's what it said originally. There's what we think it says, and there's what Muslims say it says today.
Yes.
And then there's what's enshrined in the law, which says we hate the Jews and kill them. Which, regardless if it said give them ice cream and a foot rub, that now says murder them. I mean, that's just how it is.
Yeah, my interest is what it meant at the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
obviously Muslims haven't a clue.
Yeah, but let's deal with what's on the page right now. So they spoke of the Christians at Najran, the embassy sent by the Christians of Najran, who he says belong to the emperor's faith. To Muhammad at Medina in 632, he tells us of the ambassadors that, like all the Christians, they say Jesus is God, the Son of God, and the third of three. And this proved further that he's the third of three, namely God, Christ, and Mary. Of course, this is not a true account of the languages, but that represents correctly what Muhammad understood to be the doctrine held by these Christians. This is clear in the following verses of the Quran. Verily now they have blasphemed to say God is a third of three. And when God shall say, O Jesus, son of Mary, hast thou said unto men, take me and my mother as two gods besides God? We can hardly wonder then that Muhammad rejected the Christianity presented to his notice. What I find interesting is that it's very obvious what this says, and then all the tafsirs try to make it say exactly anything but what it says. And of course, these are recent developments because once people looked at the Bible and looked at the Quran, they went, hey, this is not the same. But prior to that, they obviously were under the false impression that this was what the Bible taught. So we cannot doubt the sincerity of his early search after truth. He might readily have embraced and faithfully adhered to the faith of Jesus, right? But of course, he received, shall we say, apocryphal or false versions, heretical versions of the faith. And he'll discuss that here. Lamentable indeed is the reflection that so small a portion of the fair form of Christianity was disclosed by the ecclesiastics and monks of Syria, and that little how altered and distorted, right? He goes on to say, the worship of Mary exhibited in so gross a form as to leave the impression upon the mind of Muhammad that she was held to be a goddess, if not the third person and consort of the deity. And it must truly have been by such blasphemous extravagances Muhammad was repelled from the true doctrine of Jesus as the Son of God and led him to regard Jesus as only the Son of Mary, the only title by which he is spoken of in the Quran. The issue is that he then, I really find this odd that Tisdall says this, because he later goes on to say that at no time can he discover in any source that Muhammad was exposed to authentic Orthodox Christianity. Right? I don't mean Orthodox as in Eastern Orthodox, I just mean general Orthodox Christianity. And he says he obviously was either learning through hearsay or through heretical forms, known heretical forms. So it's odd that he makes such a very firm statement here, but then later he walks it back. He doesn't walk this back, but he then provides evidence that contradicts his own statements here. Any thoughts, guys? Because he says it here, Muhammad was never brought into contact with pure gospel Christianity. and it is largely to the false forms which the faith had then almost universally assumed that the rise of Islam is really due. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I can see why someone 100 years ago trying to understand the story of Muhammad and the Quran, how he would make these claims, because he would try to understand the narrative of what he's been told about Muhammad, and then trying to make it fit with Christianity, Jewish sources, and so on. I can understand him concluding these things. These things is not how it happened, but 100 years ago, that would have been a very good guess, say.
Yeah, Paul, any thoughts? Because it seems here he's trying to, I don't know, I just find Tisdall here trips over his own feet here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Quran author's aware of a lot of Christian material, Syriac homilies and stories of so Jacob of Saru and people like this. He knows a lot. I find it hard to imagine he never met any reasonable Christians. That he's aware that, I mean, he was like he's trapped in a library and he's got access to all these books, but he doesn't, or he always hears garbled versions. He never hears the correct version. He seems to know quite a lot. I'd be skeptical that he's like the old Arab, you know, in the Oasis, picking up odd little bits and bobs from other traders and putting together some garbled version. I think he knows a bit too much for that, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, some of it's going to be deliberate distortion. I mean, there's going to be, and also it looks like there were multiple editors with multiple different agendas.
Well, that's true. Yes, well, the Quran we've got isn't necessarily the Quran that he wrote.
Right. Hello, Paul. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Welcome. Good that you joined us. So we have JC and we have another Paul. Just
we're appalling together.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. So Paul and I did a show a couple of days ago. Paul is very knowledgeable of the Sharia.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. So to continue here, so repulsion from these prevented Muhammad from ever really seeking to discover the truth contained in the gospel, and this impelled him to found a new and anti-Christian religion. And there is no proof that an Arabic version of the New Testament existed in Muhammad's time, although we can genuinely speculate. It is actually, I'd say, fairly likely that there were Ethiopic Ge'ez versions of the full Bible in the region at the time. So there would have been an entire Bible in Ge'ez in the region. Even in the Orthodox Church, the gospel was neglected in favor of the legends of the saints. And this is true. There was a lot of apocryphal ideas going around, which appealed more to the popular taste for the marvelous. Arabia was a refuge for not a few heretics of different sects. And it is clear from the Quran that whether in written form or not, many of the mythical stories which are contained in the apocryphal gospels and other similar works, together with heretical views, must have reached Muhammad, been accepted by him as true, and that he should have believed these to form part of the gospel, the name of which is so often mentioned in the Quran, is surprising. The fact proves that none of his converts were earnest and well-taught Christians. And also, he must have felt far less interest in Christianity than he did in Talmudic Judaism. I'll pause there and let you guys comment.
I think the concept that he even met a Christian is kind of problematic for I mean, these are heretical groups. These are groups that would not be accepted by, as simple as we can put it, as Orthodox Christianity, because they're so they don't follow scripture at all, and there's nothing. I mean, as basic as it was, you just introduced one of the passages in the Quran where their concept of Jesus, their Isa, actually questions Allah's stupidity by saying, "Hey, you know, you and your mother and me are gods." What you know? No, that and Isa says, "I didn't say that." He basically questions Allah.
Well,
Okay.
But also, we could interpret this whole passage with in a different way, because there were also groups, schismatic groups, heretical groups, that, for instance, there were people who were worshipping Mary or overly emphasizing that. So there were groups, there were heretics that were completely off the rails. This is a paper I also want to do on the channel, Arabia Heresium Ferax, Arabia the Bearer of Heresies, Schismatic Christianity's Potential Influence on Muhammad and the Quran. And this guy does some very interesting research. So they are not necessarily talking to a distortion of the Bible. He could be talking about an accurate representation of a heresy. Any thoughts, Paul, from you on that?
This is actually one that I have not read. I'm going to have to go back and read this article, because this is the kind of stuff I love reading. so this.
And you might also like, bugger, let me find it. There's another one, not this one, not that one. Oh, bugger.
I used to spend hours and hours and hours studying different heresies just to find the original. If I can find the original works of some of these people, is just, to me, that is the mind number, when you find some of the original works of some of these heretics and you sit there and try to grasp what they really thought versus what people say they thought, and that is always interesting to me.
Yeah. There's this paper, The Quranic Jesus, a study of the parallels with non-biblical texts, and that might also be interesting for us to examine here. I want to go through these as well. Yeah, Paul, your thoughts? Other Paul, Paul Ellis. Any thoughts on what you're saying here?
Yeah, I think he needs to flesh it out a little bit more. I think I go back to the idea that he's obviously in touch with a wide range of material. The Cave of Treasures, for example. We're talking about Adam and Eve being stripped of their clothes.
Yeah, we're going to come to those. We will be discussing some of these.
The question is, how did he know? Is this the sort of thing that average, traders, sort of weirdos, people who get things wrong, make it up as they go along? And these are stories that they're passing around, and he keeps hearing garbled versions. I don't know. That's not kind of the way that's not my general sense of the Quran. I think a lot of the time he criticizes heresies, or he criticizes wrong ideas, but he also is somewhat attracted. I would agree that he's attracted to the slightly
fantastical,
unorthodox version. So, for example, he likes he wants Jesus to be born halfway between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, rather than in Bethlehem. So things like that, he's got a taste for the rather odd version. I'm not sure that means he had no idea what's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's somewhere between either he was an idiot or he was very much aligned with some of these heresies and these apocryphal, or he was twisting the stories deliberately for whatever benefit. JC, any thoughts?
I think that commented there that he was more interested in Talmudic Judaism than Christianity. I think that is true, and we can see that through the Quran and then the traditions. How that came to be by having all of this heretical material in there. I think he reached the wrong conclusion, but anyway, that's what we discuss here on this channel. But yes, there is too much Talmud to then assume that this guy was very well versed in Christianity.
Yes.
It doesn't actually quote the New Testament directly, it actually quotes heresies. So yeah, it's partially correct, I'd say.
Right. It goes on, those passages of the Quran which deal at all fully with what Muhammad's supposed to be the doctrines of Christianity date, quote, from a period when his system was already in great part matured, and they were founded on information meager, fabulous, and crude. We do not find a single ceremony or doctrine of Islam in any degree molded or even tinged by the peculiar tenets of Christianity, while on the contrary, Judaism has given its color to the whole system and lent to it the shape and type, if not the actual substance, of many ordinances. And that's in the life of Muhammad, so that will be in the Sirah. At the same time, Muhammad desired to win over Christians as well as Jews. If they were far less numerous and powerful in Arabia than were the Jews, yet the established religion of the great Byzantine Empire must have possessed some importance in Muhammad's eyes. And especially, unless Arabian Christians could be won over, political complications might arise. I mean, so this is obviously his theory as to this, and it's. I mean, we do stand on a different basis today. We know more. So, at any rate, he appealed to the gospel as a proof of his divine mission, even going so far as to state that Christ had prophesied of his coming. He speaks of Christ as the Word of God. They have no idea what that means, but denies his divinity and his crucifixion, and shows a complete ignorance of the true doctrines of the gospel. But is it ignorance or is it malice? Or is it simply the words of a heresy that he's repeating back? Because it's not necessarily ignorance. It could simply be malice. It could be intent based on a heresy that he believes. Oh, yeah, you're not.
I would say I think this is not necessarily. Depends on who I'm talking to. I would say many choose that it is malice. I honestly am not sure if it's pure malice or if it's a display of ignorance. I'm kind of stuck in the middle on that.
Another heresy, right? It could also be legitimate belief, a heresy that he follows.
I don't know if it's a belief. I just think I think in general he accepts what other people says is true, which I would put down as lack of intellectual. Well, this would actually back up many of the problems. He's a con man, is how I look at it. Whoever wrote this book is a con man, and he's so used to lying, he accepts what everybody else says.
Are you saying this is Jason R. Day, grandfather?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
The Brits will understand. Not Jason R. Day is the disgraced professor of Oxford, Cambridge, and every other university in the UK that you can imagine.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the super professor that. Yeah, sorry, man. It's just, yeah.
Well, that's a con man. He was just a con man to begin with. But there is so a standard when you're evaluating someone to decide if he's a con man. He speaks in generalities and not specifics. The entire Quran is like that.
It's very sophist. It's extremely sophist.
There is nothing in it that is detailed. Nothing. The closest he gets is small conversations, which in general do not make sense. In fact, those conversations and everything is piecemealed in this book. He can't even stay on topic. So that would either tell me this was a book at one point on small pieces of paper and it fell. I'm just throwing it out there. I know it wasn't originally written on paper, but if it's on bones and everything else, you throw it up in the air and whatever comes down, that's the order it's in.
Right. I mean, Tisdall says that he seems ignorant of the true doctrines of the gospel. I think we agree on that. But in numerous passages, because it falsely represents Christian doctrine, right? But in numerous passages, he speaks of the gospel with respect as a book of divine authority. I mean, he speaks of the Injil. So do we know that it is the actual Greek gospel?
What do we think? Could you give an example of the true doctrine of the gospel that Muhammad is?
That Jesus never died.
Complete ignorance of.
Jesus. There was no resurrection, but then the Quran contradicts itself later on with one of the others.
My reading of the Quran is that it completely confirms the Bible, the Gospels, on the
Agreed.
resurrection.
Agreed, but then Muslims will argue today that it didn't. But then I said,
no, that's just them, isn't it? But I think if you read the Quran, it's with an inquiring mind. I think it's quite clear that it upholds the gospel version of events.
Yeah, and when it says "say not three,"
we say not three.
Yeah, but when
are
they talking about the Trinity? Are they talking about those? What do they call it? The group that believes that there were three gods. What do they call that? There's a name for that. John Philipponus, who believed there were three gods. Are they talking about these Philipponists? Or are they talking about the Trinity? I mean, there's ambiguity there as well.
I think he's not happy with the Trinity as a motif, as a visible thing. He doesn't like talking about God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. He doesn't like any of that. But what he does say is he accepts that there is a Holy Spirit that strengthens Jesus. And he also mentions the Shekinah in the Ark of the Covenant, which I don't know if that's my Christianity dogma is so weak. Even I don't know if the Shekinah is the same thing as the Holy Spirit, but it must be a little bit similar.
Yeah, Paul, just be careful though. I mean, you've got a certain interpretation you've developed over several years, and you're coming from a very specialized place. So you're going to go, if everyone says the sky is blue, and you go, well, actually, the sky is pompyloid, ribozoid, purple. Right? No one knows what you're talking about because of your very specialized perspective at this point. So, yeah, so it's easier simply to go.
But the Quran, okay, well, I'll go a little slower. But the Quran uses the phrase the Holy Spirit in Arabic, and it talks about Jesus being strengthened by the Holy Spirit, which and who is the Holy Spirit? It must be some sort of force from God. So he seems. He seems comfortable with the idea that Jesus is strengthened by some entity from God called the Holy Spirit, which is what we would say. I would have no problem saying that Jesus was strengthened by the Holy Spirit. I'm not a theologian, but it seems like that's a reasonable thing for someone to say. If someone said that, I wouldn't regard them as being totally ignorant of the Gospels. And he talks about Jesus being a word from God. Well, that's very similar to the start of the Gospel of St. John.
Yes.
And he talks about God's Spirit being breathed into Mary's womb, and then being breathed into, and Jesus being a spirit from God. And so he's not. So he seems to accept there's some entity out there called the Holy Spirit, and he seems to accept that Jesus in some way embodies an element of the divine in a sense that no other human being, possibly the original Adam, pre-Lapsian Adam, might also had the Spirit of God blown into him, but it's not necessarily. I find it hard to say that he's in complete ignorance of the true gospel doctrines of the gospel, but I agree that he's not comfortable with talking about the Trinity and aligning the three together as a theological concept. He presents it in his own way, I guess.
I would say I think because he lacks the concept of critical thinking skills, he lacks the ability to question things, or refuses to, because he's so used to being the con man. I think there's something there. I mean, maybe he hates it. Maybe he hated his father. I don't know. But there is such a refusal to accept certain things, like the concept of God as a father. There is so much that he has to fight against. He wants. There are so many Christian apologists who will go out there and say that the Quran is written as an antithesis to the Bible. The whole Islamic faith is that. And I look at this and I say, well, it's possible, but I think this guy, and the more I learn is I've come to more of a belief that I don't necessarily believe there was such a guy as Muhammad, but I'm going to go from where I have to deal with to talk to Muslims about the truth. This person, if he existed, has beliefs that are more likely to originate, I would say, in another area of the world, but and that they're not in Saudi Arabia. I think some of these things, some of these beliefs, these combination of Gnosticism, I don't see as developing in Arabia. I see it as developing in Petra.
They could also come from, as I showed this one here, they speak here of Najran was a center of Christian, where people do pilgrimages, but also when the Gnostics and the pagans were all kicked out of Rome, they went to a handful of locations like Haran, Alexandria, as well as Najran. And there was a lot of confusion over what was legit. So you had genuine Christian doctrine going up against multiple other sects, and it confused the living daylights out of people. So yeah, so I mean, maybe from Petra, for all I know, but it spread around the world. You know? So these ideas did travel, and then people could have also heard it on their travels and then misreported it when they get Chinese whispers.
And that I think is the key aspect, is because we have to look at their concept of Muhammad was he had been a traveling salesman at some point in his life. And where did he get some of these ideas? And I think they have a number of problems with the concept that he was a traveling salesman and illiterate at the same time. But I mean, I don't know how you can be a traveling salesman and not keep good records.
That's right. That's a fair point. So to go on, it says here, as a book of divine authority. So it is that the book is regarded the gospel, but it's the Injil. Do we know that it's the gospel? How do we know it's not the I don't know. How do we know it's not some other book that was popular at the time? Like, what's the book? The one that was the harmonization of the four gospels?
Diatessaron.
The Diatessaron. Yeah. How do we know it's not the Diatessaron, for argument's sake? Right? Something like that. Or it's one of the many apocryphal gospels that were floating around, right? So he records.
It's kind of. Sorry, if I can just pose in there. I also find it quite interesting that the Injil is in the singular. So he talks about the gospel, and that's not so unusual. You can have Christians talking about the gospel when they mean all four gospels, and what they mean is not necessarily the text of the four gospels. Or what they would mean is the good news, which is of course what I think gospel originally means. It is the good. So the word gospel, it's reasonable to use it as the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke, so Saint Matthew, Saint Luke, but it's also possible to just talk in general terms as the gospel, as the good news that Jesus comes to deliver. And it may be that the Quran does the same thing, and maybe the Quran also uses Injil, which is just an Arabic form of the Greek Evangelion, to say yes. So when he talks about the good news coming down upon Jesus, it might mean that Jesus produced a book, but I don't think so, because there was no book. I think he was talking about Jesus's message.
Now, the word Injil is also very close etymologically to the Ethiopic word Wanjil. So it basically came from Greek to Ethiopic too. And we're joined by the one and only. Oh my God. Is your name also Paul? Because we have 2 Pauls, and 3 Pauls would be a hat trick.
How many Husains do you have?
There's only one. There is only one. Hello, Husain. Meet Paul and meet Paul and JC.
Hello, guys.
Hey, Paul, I just want to say, Paul, I'm impressed with some of the stuff you've been putting out lately. It's been really, really good, man. God bless you.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to credit Lloyd here, because he put me on that track, and and I guess I'm behaving like a dog with a bone. I just want to dig deeper and tear things apart. So I don't think we don't do our due diligence when we don't dig, and that's what it comes down to.
Yeah,
some things need to be torn apart, so that was great. So
yeah, no, but it's great to have you as well. You guys are always welcome here. You guys are welcome to join us. We've got lots of topics coming up. We're glad to have your expertise, your knowledge. It really adds, I think, when we've got these. You guys know a lot. None of us knows everything. So together, I think we really add a lot of knowledge. Ben Bass says the word al-Injil in Quran is singular. Some of the narration in the Quran explicitly sounds like the same with the Diatessaron, which was popular in Syriac Orthodox Christianity, which is true. And then you can do it too, says the Injil descending on Christ sounds like baptism. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, those are things we can ponder. Husain, you listened for a few minutes, I'm sure. What are your thoughts on where we are so far? We're going a little slower than I expected. I thought I'd be doing more reading, but it seems like this is a really good discussion. What are your thoughts?
well, I like the topic, about the apocryphal sources, and both the apocryphal sources in terms of the from the Christian side, and then the from the Jewish fairy tale you know, kind of, they had a Mother Goose, you know, that's, they kind of had their Mother Goose book, and Muhammad heard it and said, "Oh, that's a nice story. That sounds really inspired." And so it ended up in the Quran, you know, and so many of the, which for me, you know, one thing I'd like to do, I haven't done it, but I've been thinking about it for a long time, is going through the Quran and the Hadith and just picking out when the people around him said, dude, these are stupid stories. We've heard these all before. We know where they're from. It's all a bunch of garbage. We know they're lies, and they end up in your book. And you know, of course, after a while, they wouldn't say that anymore because, you know, they'd lose their head. And so when he became powerful, but they knew, and one in particular that was real, which you know, I apologize, I may have missed it, but that was very interesting for me, was recently, and this was only a few months ago, it was in the New York Post about the Gospel of Thomas, you know, the infancy Gospel of Thomas, when they found that, and it was in the New York Post, and it was like 3 years before Muhammad was born that thing started circulating. And so, you know, that thing was out there, you know, Muhammad heard it, and you know how it got into the Quran about him, the baby talking, and, you know, defending his mother, you know, with the adultery and everything. So, yeah, Muhammad and everything. And the funny thing is, everybody knew it was this way. In his day, everybody knew it was this way. They called him the ear, and Allah in the Quran says they call him the ear, because he Williams put on next week, you know.
Paul Williams, who blocked me on X, he was very excited when they found the oldest written version of this Gospel of Thomas, or whatever it was, because he said the oldest copy of an ancient gospel that confirms the Quran has been found. And I'm like, you got to be retarded. So, you know, an ancient Christian text that confirms the Quran has been, like, whatever. Yeah, even Aisha does call Muhammad out for twisting scripture. But also, I mean, what Paul Ellis has been saying, I mean, there's room for, like, it obviously depends on your background, depends on your knowledge, depends on your perspective, but there is room for more than one interpretation of what we're reading here. And it's not necessarily that two different interpretations are wrong in this case. They're not necessarily contradictory. There's room for some ambiguity here, I think, on some things. It's just that ultimately, once you put it all together, what forms the best scenario? You know, yeah. So he records the virgin birth of Christ, right? He says that the Quran came to preserve the Bible, which itself is, I mean, that's a major weak point, as you know. That is the Quranic dilemma. He records the virgin birth of Christ and mentions some of his miracles, but even here, the legendary tone predominates. And Muhammad seems to have learned what little he knew of our Lord and his apostles from very unreliable hearsay. Paul, just briefly, Paul Ellis, just briefly, I mean, what is your interpretation of that? I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, this is his view from Tisdall. What are your thoughts on that? Like 30 seconds.
No, 30 seconds. I think you need a framework. You need some. You have to test several different ideas, but we need some kind of framework to try and understand any piece. You've got to try and put the pieces together into some sort of overall picture. To me, two factors I think need to be established, or to me, they're absolutely established. One is that the traditional narrative is false. So I don't attach any credence whatsoever to any seerah or any story attaching to Muhammad. So I just wipe all that out. Now that's just, I think it's all nonsense. Nobody who wrote those stories knew anything about Muhammad. The other thing is that he wasn't really, it's that 99 surahs make absolutely no explicit reference to the New Testament or New Testament characters like Jesus and Mary and so on. It's only at the very end that Muhammad seems to appreciate Christianity or acknowledge Christianity. Up until then, he's just pointedly avoided it, and if he gives a list of examples, is the examples of people like Moses and Noah and Lot. He specifically ignores all Christians up until the end. So he's not really a Christian. He doesn't really believe, but for some reason he wants to incorporate Christianity at the end of his message.
And Tisdall is right there. Yeah, Muhammad seems to have a wonderful talent for rejecting the true and accepting the false. I'd say so.
Could I ask a question about that? About what Paul just said about the just because of the connection to Waraka bin Nawfal, there's always kind of been this understanding that he, Waraka bin Nawfal, Ebionite, with regarding to the Gospel of Matthew and everything like that. And you would expect that the Christian, some Christian stories would seep through that, but you seem to kind of be saying that that's not the case.
That's an interesting observation.
Where did Waraka bin Nawfal live? And the answer is Mecca. But there was no Mecca. We spent a lot of the summer detailing that there simply was no Mecca, or the Mecca of the traditional narrative simply couldn't possibly have existed. So you've got the guy in a fictitious city from the outset. I just don't attach any credence to any story that assumes the existence of Mecca. It's all built on a lie.
Paul, Ellis,
may I jump in briefly? That this book is basically, the author assumes the standard Islamic narrative to be true, Muhammad being around doing these things, and then he's trying to figure out where did his stories come from, all of these Talmudic and heretic stories, where they came from. So this is what he's trying to unpack, but he really believes that the narrative happened as we've been told, and here on the channel we've been discussing that. We even disagree about the existence of Muhammad. So we take it with a pinch of salt and we just extract the stories that he's saying, hey, this story actually came from that group, and at least it's helping us out. But we would disagree with him if this author Tisdall was here on the panel. We would say Muhammad didn't exist, and we would be discussing the narrative, basically.
So, yeah, Muhammad seems to have a wonderful talent for rejecting the truth and accepting the false, just as in the case of the Jewish traditions referred to in the preceding chapter. We proceed to prove this by referring to some of the fables dealing with Christian subjects contained in the Quran, indicating the sources from which they appear to have been derived. Now, I know that recently Jay Smith has started to do a series on these apocryphal sources in the Quran, and I know others have now started talking about these Jewish sources. I know 7 months ago, someone did a series. They appeared on David Wood's channel, and hopefully the fact that we've covered some of this at length, gone through Tisdall's book and other sources on the channel, hopefully that's inspired others to go into more detail, and hopefully it'll encourage others to start looking at these. But let's do this in a little bit of length. It's a somewhat longer story. Legend of the Companions of the Cave. The first with which we shall deal is the legend of the Companions of the Cave. In Surah something, 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 something. I did African education, so I am not going to even try. Hast thou considered what the companions of the cave and Ar-Rakim were among us signs of marvel? When the youths betook themselves to the cave, they said, Our Lord, bring us mercy from thyself, and from our matter prepare for us guidance. Accordingly, we smote upon their ears in the cave a number of years. Why on their ears? Afterwards we aroused them that we might know which of the two parties had reckoned unto what time they had remained, an age. Yeah, this guy's not a very good storyteller. We shall relate to thee the account of them with truth. Verily there were youths who believed in their Lord, and we increased guidance upon them. And we girt up their hearts when they stood. Then said they, Our Lord is the Lord of the heavens and of the earth. We shall never call any beside him Allah, or God. And then had we uttered a boundless lie. These our people have taken gods beside him, unless they bring clear authority for them. Who then is more unjust than he who hath devised a lie against Allah? And when ye have withdrawn from them, and take what they worship beside Allah, then betake yourselves to the cave. Thus your Lord will unfold unto you of his mercy, and will prepare for you advantage out of your matter. And thou seest the sun when it riseth, recede from their cave towards the right hand, and when it setteth, turn aside from them towards the left hand, and they were an interstice of it. That is one of God's signs. Whenever Then whomsoever then Allah guideth, he is guided, and for him whom he misguideth, thou shalt never find a patron as a guide. And thou wouldst reckon them awake, though they are asleep, and we turn them over towards the right hand and towards the left. And this sounds like a cat in the hat story, man. This is Dr. Seuss. And then their dog stretcheth out his forepaws on the threshold, and if thou hadst come upon them, thou wouldst indeed have turned from them in flight, and thou wouldst have been filled with dread of them, and therefore did we arouse them, that they might inquire of one another. The speaker from among them said, How long have you remained? They said, We have remained a day or portion of a day. They said, Your Lord knowest well how long you have remained. Send therefore one of you with this your coin into the city, and let him see which man of it has the purest food, and let him bring your provisions from him, and let him be kind, and let him not inform anyone concerning you. Verily, if they discover you, should I pause here? Should I keep going? I think it's important to finish the story. Any comments so far, guys? Anything you want to add?
All right, I'll make a little comment about the coin, but do you want to finish the story? And then
No, go on. No, make the comment. I'll read it as I go later. Yeah.
Okay, well, in the version of the story by Jacob of Saru, the companions of the cave discover that they've been in the cave for so long when they send one of them to the market to buy food, and he goes down to the market and he takes out his coin, and the coin has got the image of Decius, who was the Roman emperor who was persecuting him, and people notice he's got this very old coin, and they say, "Don't you know that the Roman Empire is now Christian? We've had Constantine, and it's all the Christian Empire." And so the symbolism of their persecutor is associated with money, filthy lucre, but his time has passed away and he's long dead, and their faith has endured because they're now in what might be metaphorically seen as if the whole thing is a metaphor for the resurrection. They're kind of in a new Jerusalem that's all Christianized. So the coin is actually quite a rather nice detail in the story of Jacob of Saru. Question is, why do they mention it in the Quran? Because it seems like an utterly pointless, if you don't have that meaning to it, it's an utterly pointless thing that the guy goes into the town and gets some food because he's got some money. Well, obviously he's got money if he's buying food, but what's that got to do with anything? So this story, the way I see it, assumes that the readers know the Jacob of Saru version.
I think that's fair. Yeah, the Quran does assume people know various of the biblical details in other story and Talmud and so on and Midrash. And they said, Verily, if they discover you, they will stone you or bring you back into their community, and then forever you shall never prosper. And thus we made it known concerning them that men might know that God's promise is true, and that as to the hour, there is no doubt about it. I mean, that's odd, the hour. Why are we talking about the hour of Judgment Day? That is really interesting, because he confirms. And when they argued among themselves about their matter, then they said, Build a building over them. Their Lord knoweth well about them. Those who prevailed in their matter said, We shall surely erect a mosque over them. Now that sounds a little contrived.
Sounds like New York.
Say again?
Sorry, that sounds like New York, but sorry.
Yeah, this is written by Imam Dani. He makes about as much sense. We shall surely erect a mosque. Yeah, go on.
I think a mosque has got to be a bit of an anachronism there. There were no mosques in the time of the Quran, so it's it's a place of prostration, a place of worship over it.
Yeah,
I think.
No, they will say there were 3. The 4th of them was their dog, and they will say there were 5. The 6th of them was their dog. A conjecture concerning the mystery. Who cares? It's like this is a real mystery. And they will say there were 7. The 8th of them was their dog. Say thou, my Lord is well aware of their number, but a few know about them. None but a few know about them. And they remained in their cave 300 years, and they added 9. Say thou, Allah is well aware of how long they remain. To him belongeth the mystery of the heavens and of the earth. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I just want this is the comical part for me. It's just like the math is this complex that you get the 5 or 6, the whole counting system here. He counts the dogs along with the dog along with the people, and you still can't get it right. You need Allah's supreme intelligence to tell you if it was 6 or 7 or 8. And Allah knows for sure, but he won't tell in his word. These are Allah's words. And I just think it's humorous the way they try to make it poetry, make it poetic or something like that. But in reality, it's so absurd, It's just say it's 6 and you can eliminate, 14 words out of this,
Sounds like a drunk person telling you a story.
You know what? Father Zechariah said that and started a revolution in Egypt. In Arabic says, Katib al-Quran, Mastulun Sakran. He made that little poem, the writer of the Quran is a disoriented drunk. And literally the president of Egypt had to get involved. It was so controversial. But that's the truth. It's like a disoriented drunk wrote this,
Yeah, I agree. Sutliff, Paul?
I think this is a great example of a con man not knowing how to. Con mans are known for being able to tell stories, but this guy has no critical thinking skills. So this is a low-level intellect who can't even see the words coming out of his mouth meaning next to nothing. This guy can't even con the people listening to him. They're saying, oh, this guy is stupid. He listens to everything, he believes it, and he repeats it. They called him the ear for a reason, because he couldn't even tell a believable story. And that says something about the guy they call perfect.
Right.
But Paul, where do you say that the con is?
So when you constantly, I'm saying the whole Quran is a con job. It's written without any details. So this is when you talk to con men, they give you generalities. They never speak in specifics. They're always like, okay, they're going to talk to you about profit you're going to make. They're never going to give you specifics. They'll give you generalities. And that's how people fall for the con. They don't give you the reason.
Okay, so on the story of the sleepers in the cave, bearing in mind what you're saying, what is specifics?
That's it.
Is the con about
he can't even say this whole thing everything he takes in goes through his con man perspective. This is why he can't retell his story. The story was probably told with a very specific details, but he cannot reiterate this. So my background, just to let you know, I was a special education teacher. I would look at most of this, and I would, most of the Quran, and I would say written maybe by a 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade level person, maybe. And I say that because he can't tell a consistent story. In this thing, he can't even get the story straight. It's like there's problems with the Arabic too. Okay, so Steve knows this. The Arabic is so bad that he mixes his plurals, his singulars. These are things done by a person who is a second language learner. So he's not a native Arabic speaker, the person who wrote this. He is a person who learned Arabic as a second language. And there's a whole bunch of things here. But again, I'm sorry. It's taking all that.
You know what?
No, but I'm not here to defend Muhammad. I just wonder what in particular about this passage makes you think it's a con in some way.
No, I'm saying he heard the story from someplace, but he can't even reiterate it correctly. So this is a low intellectual person. That's what I'm trying to say also. He cannot. So he's like a person who can't take on another person's perspective. He can hear the story, but he can't retell it. That's an intellectual disability. And I'm being very kind saying that, that terminology. Look it up. You'll see what I'm saying. It's a sad truth.
Yeah.
If I could just say one thing about what Paul's saying, because when you were saying that, the one thing I'm thinking about is you have all these Muslims with doctorate degrees in the West now. They're doctors, they're scientists, they're nuclear scientists, and they're so educated, so intelligent, but they can't explain these things here, and yet they're forced to accept these things. And their brain is like on tilt, like, dude, this doesn't make sense. They know the weakness of it in their brain, but they're forced to accept that this is the word of Allah. They're afraid to go it's kind of like showing you how this Bedouin, camel traders explanation of things and weak education and weak knowledge is controlling these people. Because this is the word of Allah, you're stuck with it,
So the thing is, we have an issue with distortion. We have an issue with omission. And these are by no means beneficial. This is not clarity. These are ideas that are not clearly labeled, not clearly described, and therefore are easily open to further manipulation. And it seems to be the intent behind this, and whatever it may have been. But anyway, let's go on. So to understand this rather hesitating account, we must remember, as the commentators inform us, some of the heathen Arabs of Mecca had challenged Muhammad to tell them the story of the companions of the cave, if he could, in order to test his claim to inspiration. I mean, the fact that this story is in the Quran, which is supposedly the direct word of Allah and supposedly inspiration, this is a sign of this is theological fraud. I mean, it doesn't clarify that, hey, we're going to tell you an apocryphal tale. We're going to tell you a comic book story. We're going to tell you a fictional tale. It passes it off. We're supposed to regard all of this as some kind of divine, amazing inspiration and be awed by this, right? And the story is supposed to have some kind of profound, it's like I tell a profound story because I was inspired by Allah. One day I walked up the mountain. I was with a friend and we puffed. It was a long trek. We walked up the mountain. We were tired. We got to the top and I turned around and I looked at my friend and I said, shall we go higher? Shall we go back? Shall we go further? Shall we go back down? And my friend and I, we argued back and forth for a while and then we walked back down. And you're like, huh? That's anticlimactic. It's kind of like we're supposed to go like that was some kind of amazing revelation. And like, what was the point of that? So yeah, I think there's someone who ran out of ideas and is also trying to push stupid things. As he needs your suspension of disbelief to the point of you becoming an imbecile. Yeah.
Right, he's aware when this story appears in the Quran, the person who wrote it and put it in there is perfectly aware that it's a metaphor for the resurrection, isn't he?
He doesn't make that clear. I mean, does he know, or do we assume that
it refers? Right? Does it not refer to the hour halfway through? There's this way he calls them to be discovered that I know God's promise is true and that there is no doubt about the hour. So he's whilst in the middle of the story, there is this little reminder that it's all about the resurrection, that it's about demonstrating the truth of the resurrection.
Enough, but it's not clear. Yeah, JC, go on.
Yeah, that particularly the original legend was for that, to tell people that the resurrection would be the resurrection of the body, and that makes the theme into the Quran. But I think we could talk about that particular part of the surah for days. There is so much wrong with it. For me, the very clear thing that it proves is that when this was written, they didn't see this text as divine, as revelation. It had nothing to do with a guy called Muhammad. It simply made it into the Quran. That's why it doesn't even say how many people are in the cave. The guy writing it or saying it to the people is like, some people say it's 5, some people say it's like no one cares. It's not seen as divine. It is later when Muslims are told this is divine, and if you complain about it, you are going to be in trouble. So it just proves that the purpose of the book that is not what we believe now. When this was written, the purpose was something different. It's just the stories being put together.
Yeah, interesting. Just as from the comment from Karina Schmidt-Binder, weren't the Ebionites and Nestorians on the Arabian Peninsula? They rejected Trinity and were considered heretics. This is worth considering. Yeah, Tisdall's work would be worth considering in context of newer work. Remember, until fairly recently, there was a denial that there was any form of Christianity or Judaism in Arabia. It was purely Islam, and Islam sprung out of nothing, right? Muhammad gave magical farts, and boom, there was the Quran and the stories, right? But recently, we know from research, and I've gone back to, these are a couple of theses. This one, the Quranic Jesus, study of parallels with non-biblical texts. There's this one, and there are others I've covered on the channel in the past that is showing now there was far more Christian presence and Jewish presence in Arabia than was acknowledged until recently. This is knowledge that's known by scholars for decades, but Islam had to push the idea, and many Christian scholars went along with it, that there was nothing but Islam and Christianity had died out, there was nothing. But it now turns out, and here you can see, allegedly the Ebionite heresy was first developed by this Nazarene sect. Odon would speak at length about that. And it is significant to note the Ebionites existed in Syria until at least the 5th century. They were extreme monotheists who emphasized the Jewish law. And that would potentially have a parallel with Islam. So it would be worth in the future going over these documents on this channel. I would, at least. I've been meaning to for some time. And that gives us more context for where these beliefs arose from.
The Ebionites, that's the Waraka bin Nofel angle, you know,
Yeah, so we need to maybe add more context, and then we can start to see, but hold on, yeah, these people were present, these ideas were present, and that could explain, and then this is where the original was, this is the current story, here's the distortion, and maybe we can find a source for that, you know, rather than speculate on how the change occurred.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. This idea that there were no, that Muhammad or whoever wrote the Quran didn't have any contact with Jews or Christians, that's part of the wider picture that it all took place in Mecca, the city that didn't exist, that couldn't have existed, and this whole false narrative that was all based around Mecca. And that's all an attempt to what Tom Holland refers to as a blank slate, this idea that the Quran had to appear. They needed a blank page to put their prophet on. They couldn't, so they had to create. First of all, he's just out there in the desert somewhere, and then they needed somewhere, so they said, "Oh, okay, this place will do." But it's but they want him to be completely detached from the rest of the world, whereas of course the Quran contains so many references to Jewish and Christian and other works that it's not it's just not credible that these are just occasional snatches of story heard here or there. He was totally engaged with the ancient world.
There's something to bear in mind is that we now have maybe one version of the story that's been popularized right in the 21st century, but back in Muhammad's day, there were competing versions of many of these stories. So he had multiple versions to choose from that hadn't yet collapsed into a single popular version or a single popular print version that we have today. So therefore, they weren't necessarily using the one that we have, right? We might have lost that version. So it says here, the story was evidently therefore current among them in some form, perhaps in more than one. There was a dispute on the number of persons in the cave, and various opinions were stated. Muhammad, from the Quran, promised to give them an answer the next day, right? He evidently failed to obtain that information, and he left the question of the number of people unsettled, and his attempt to get out of the difficulty is not successful. Nor does he tell the place, where, or the time when the event is said to have occurred. But this kind of omission, this lie of omission, is common in the Quran. It's the norm, this whole sophist, slippery language. And he ventures to assert positively just one fact. The time in the cave was 309 years. Unfortunately, even in this, he was wrong. There's no doubt that the event recorded in the story really occurred. And from the whole style of the passage, Muhammad had no written document and no reliable informant that could give him the exact particulars of the affair. Now, we possessed more than one form of the legend written before Muhammad's time, and it is clear that to an oral form of the story, he was indebted for the particulars given in the Quran. So an oral form, very likely that we don't have. And he claimed, and not to divine revelation as he claimed to be. So the Syriac writer Jacob of Sarug, in a homily published in Acta Sanctorum, gives the myth at some length. He died in 8521. Other early Syriac forms of the story are also known. So Vide bar Hebreos, okay, Chronica or Chronicles Ecclesiasticus, right? Asimani, Biblia Orientus. Okay, so there's others. There's other collections of the story as well. Most accounts say there were 7 sleepers, hence the name by which the tale is known in Europe, but one Syriac manuscript of the 6th century in the British Museum says they numbered 8. Mohammedan commentators on the Quran relate traditions, some of which say there were 7, others 8, a point which Muhammad practically in the Quran acknowledged his inability to decide. And as far as we know, the first European writer to relate the legend was Gregory of Tours. Any thoughts, guys, before we go on?
You know, this. I just want to say one thing about. There's another number situation with Muhammad, and it's about the when the angels that carry Allah's throne. Mm-hmm. That one of them, their wingspan is like 15 years or something like that. It's like 15 years long, and the way Muhammad says it is kind of funny. He says, I have been given permission to tell you this, that the wingspan is 15 miles long or whatever, or 15 years long, and it's like he was given permission to tell us this. It's like, what the heck? What benefit to humanity is this knowledge? Why did Allah give him permission? And it's just a way of muddling or trying to sanctify
some kind of credibility by saying, I have special knowledge and I can tell you this very secret thing.
Yeah. And so this right here reminds me of that. He's got to sanctify this fact that, there's this confusion about how many people were inside there. And so much of Islam is like that, and so anyway.
Anyone else?
Yeah, that just add my normal warning, my little warning. All this, yes, that's a story from the whatever hadith or some such. So I don't know about angels, how wide their wingspan is and that sort of thing. But if you accept that the Mecca story is unreliable, you have to accept that the whole of the narrative is unreliable, because there's nothing that could be found to be reliable if the whole basis is not reliable. And what I find interesting and genuinely interesting about this is it would have been very easy for him to say, oh, there were 7 sleepers, or there were 5 sleepers, or whatever, or 3 and a dog, 1 man and his dog, or whatever. He could easily have come up with a figure, and no one's there to prove him or disprove him. I find it kind of curious that he doesn't just make up a number, but that's I can't see a reason why he raises the issue simply to say that there are different versions and he's not going to tell us which one is correct.
If they could memorize the Quran, how come they can't memorize 7 sleepers and a dog?
But it would have been easy for him to make up a number, is what I'm saying. Why wouldn't he? I don't know.
Well, I mean, he's either a retard, or he's dealing with a bunch of retards, or there's just something in the water that's making them all retards. I have no idea.
Well, as I said, intellectual disability, which is the word you're using, that is definitely intellectual disability is the modern way to say that.
YouTube would like me a lot more for saying that. Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
He is. I don't think he. This author.
Are you saying that the Prophet Muhammad is special? Is that what we're saying?
He would fit in one of my classrooms. That's what I would have said a few years back.
I think it's a very special prophet, and this is a very special book.
I would say I'm not sure that Muhammad actually existed, but the person who wrote this is very special. I mean, you can't communicate details when you receive detailed information. That is like you have he either has audio processing difficulty, or he has a difficulty in selecting words. And there's something seriously wrong there, because the details did exist during his time period. And these are for all of the stories that he relays. And one of the things I think is the funniest, which I'm waiting for Usama to do, he's going to do a series on the parables in the Quran someday in the future. I actually have to take this, excuse me.
Okay.
Sorry.
Mute you.
You know what? I think that also about I like what you said, Paul, about the fact that he could have just settled the thing. Just say there was 8. Okay. It would have been easy to do that. Nobody was going to argue with him about it. But instead, he foists it onto Allah. He says Allah knows it, and I don't know. I was just thinking that maybe this was an issue. Maybe he talked to some people and they said, okay, this one says it's 7 and this person says it's 8. And it was a real point of contention between those people, to where Muhammad knew that, you know what, if I say 7, it's going to anger these people. If I say 8, it's going to anger these people. So let's just foist it onto Allah. Say Allah knows, So anyway, that's just a theory. So
could be.
Fair enough. So he tells us, in the reign of Emperor Decius, AD 249 to 51, 7 noble young Christians of Ephesus fled from persecution, took refuge in a cave not far from the city. After a time, their enemies discovered them. Oh, good grief, not again. Okay. Right. I have no idea what just happened there. Allah works in mysterious ways, as you guys.
It's a jinn. You've got a jinn in your computer.
Oh my gosh.
A
Okay, so guys, I'm gonna make some holy water. So I think the process is, you take some water, you boil the hell out of it. Then, once it's been purified like that, you pour it on the computer, right? Then I'll fix my computer that way. So I'll be
worth a go. Do you have any camels, sir?
No. What do we do with the camels?
I don't know. Maybe if water doesn't work, maybe you can find some other.
Actually, you know what? I have a camel.
Amazed. You're amazing. It cures all sorts.
That actually is a camel. So yeah, you can't see it. It's a little blurry in the back there, but that actually is a camel, by the way.
Did you say inshallah?
Can you guys just pray for me and ask Allah to send me send me blessings or something, so my PDF stops dying on me.
To defeat the jinn, to cast out the jinni.
Yeah, that one. Hold on, where the heck are we here? Because
to win an election in the United States these days, you have to say inshallah. So maybe you didn't.
Yeah, you're right, man. You're right. The times have changed. Let me see here. Where are we?
Let me add quickly, while you look for that the Quran seems to be full of little clues, like why would Muhammad in this case speak in that manner instead of just settling the number and things like that. I think something as well quite important is that in the same surah, it actually has the Alexander the Great story. They're actually pretty much back to back, which maybe actually points at these stories, or this surah in particular, coming from a particular region, which could help us actually pin down some details. Just a fun fact that this story and Alexander the Great, they happen to be very, very close by, as opposed to, in completely different places. But that's something to investigate and speculate in other shows.
Camel. You asked me if I have a camel pull. What do we need the camel for?
Oh, there you go.
Well,
what do we need the camel pull for?
Well, so that he can contribute the miracle liquid that might fix your computer.
My computer needs some of that. Gee whiz.
Yeah,
don't worry. I hope it doesn't do it on my shoulder.
If holy water doesn't do it, maybe
Just hang on. Just
maybe
squeeze.
Camel.
Do I need to pull something or squeeze anywhere? Gee whiz. Yeah. I got this in Mongolia, believe it or not. Got this little guy in Mongolia.
It's the camel of Allah.
Back to our regularly scheduled programming. After a time, their enemies discovered where they were and blocked up the entrance to the cave, leaving them to die of hunger. When Theodosius II was on the throne, 196 years later, a herdsman found and opened the cave. The 7 sleepers then awoke from the slumber in which they had remained during the whole time, and as the Quran says also, sent one of the party to the city to purchase provisions. He found Christianity everywhere triumphant to his boundless surprise. At a shop where he bought some food, he produced a coin of Decius to pay for it. Accused of having discovered a hidden treasure, he told the story of himself and his companions, and when he led the way to the cave, the appearance of his companions, still young and radiant with a celestial brightness, proved the truth of his story. The emperor soon heard of it and went to the cave, where the awakened sleepers told him that God had preserved them in order to prove to him the truth of the immortality of the soul. And then, having told him the message, they died. So he says it is quite unnecessary to comment on the silliness of the tale as told in the Quran. Although Muhammad cannot be deserving of more blame for accepting it as truth than the ignorant Christians by whom it was so widely spread and in all probability invented. And also, it's possible the story was an allegory, or more probably a religious romance, framed with the intention of showing with what wonderful rapidity the Christian faith had spread. So it seems that in the telling of these versions of the story, there's no mention of the end times. It's a different meaning. So Muhammad puts in his own the hour reference, which now is his version of it or something. So be this as it may, it is undoubtedly the case that long before Muhammad's day, the legend had credence in many parts of the East, and even apparently in quote-unquote Mecca, it was believed. Muhammad's fault lay in pretending that he had received it as divine revelation. And it's as true as Cinderella or any other story. So what do you guys say here?
You know, there's an interesting thing about the fact that they gave the answer and then died, just because, you know, there's that story about the cow, you know, the beef revelation where the guy died, and then they hit him with a piece of beef, and you know, he comes back to life, and then he tells this person killed me, and then he dies again. You know, so it's just kind of similar to that story. But
Steve, I sent you this message. I meant to send it to Paul. Sorry, I just sent the wrong person.
I think it's very similar. The story is very similar to one that's told in Surah Al-Baqarah, which has only got one person, one long sleeper, but it's the same basic idea. One person falls asleep. That in that case, it's based upon a Talmudic and also a Christian. They're both versions of the same general story, in which Jeremiah had sent out his servant to get him some figs, and then the guy fell asleep, and when he woke up, he'd missed out on the whole of the Babylon captivity. So he wakes up and he sees that the old temple is gone and there's a new temple in its place. And it's the same story. It's essentially and in that case, in the Quran, it links in directly to the prophecy of Ezekiel, with the bones coming together and being clothed with flesh. So to my mind, there's no ambiguity there that he's talking about the judgment on the last day, and the stories are so similar. I see no problem in saying that it's used here as an allegory for judgment on the last day.
Do you see anything from your side?
Yeah, actually, yes, Sam, I agree with that. And I think as an allegory goes, it could be just as simple as, yeah, you know, you will be resurrected. These people were resurrected. It could be just as plain as that, and it could be actually more intense. But yeah, they copied this story because it had a purpose, and Muhammad didn't know it very well.
Yeah, well, do we know that? I mean, do we know that Muhammad didn't know that it was an allegory?
There was no Muhammad, so
is Muhammad an allegory? Maybe Muhammad's an allegory himself, but I don't know. Certainly, in the Surah Al-Baqarah version with the solitary sleeper, there's no reason to think that he didn't figured that it was just a story, an allegory to tell his tale. And what his tale is, what we believe, which is that if you die, you'll be resurrected and face judgment on the last day. And that's and if you live a righteous life, then and you can trust to God to be merciful and allow you into a new Jerusalem. So it's not a. I think referring to him as being silly. I think Tisdall kind of missed the point himself a bit, which is the whole thing is an allegory for the resurrection.
Yeah, but the version of the story in the Quran is one thing, but the versions that were popular don't have that detail. They're a different version of the story. So, so that we have to be careful that we are following the same versions and looking at what other sources have, as I mentioned earlier. So, yep. So the pop quiz, guys. How many sleepers were there in the story of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus? No prizes for guessing.
Allah knows.
Sorry, what? Allah knows. Allah knows. That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Do you want a camel?
You know what? You're the one who started this, and Pinky is not. Pinky has a problem with jealousy, and so anyway, that's.
Oh my God! The monk. Don't do the monkey. That. I got a whole line of plushie toys. 2 of them fell off already, right? I got a whole bunch. And yeah, so yeah, if you want to play this game, I can escalate.
You started. We escalated. So.
It was Paul and the camel. Okay, it was Paul and the story of the camel. Okay, I was inspired by Allah in preparation for the story of the camel. So I have my camel here.
Well, there's monkeys that were stoned for adultery. So
yeah, be ye apes, Husain.
Right.
Be ye apes and monkeys. And
so look, the next story is the story of the Virgin Mary. Yeah. So I wonder, maybe we should.
One thing we can say, we just be clear, is that the dog wasn't one of the sleepers, because the dog was a guard dog, and he was there keeping them safe. So that guard dog was vigilant for 309 years. That dog did his duty. So well done that dog.
I have a theory.
To think Muslims don't like dogs often, but the only dog in the Quran is an extraordinarily virtuous and loyal working dog.
That's a very good point. They don't like dogs. Kamala Harris. Don't be harsh to my poor camel. It's done nothing to you, okay? But I have a theory. Muhammad was hard of hearing. They called him the ear because he was hard of hearing. Because it was the 7 slippers of Ephesus.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that is.
You heard it here first, people. The 7 slippers, because the dog ate one, and you can't tell me that's not a credible theory.
It's a flip flop sort of slipper. Yeah, his hearing would have to be very bad before he heard the 7 flip flops of Ephesus.
The 7 slippers, okay? I'm trying to make a point here. Don't confuse us with I don't have it. Okay, fine. Slippers, fine.
The difference
slippers of Ephesus. And the dog
you need to get the 7 out proof, don't you?
We know why it wasn't 8. The dog ate one, and they had 7 slippers left.
Dude,
that's my story, and I'm sticking by it.
It sounds sahih to me. So,
so yeah, I think so. Yeah, the next story, the story of the Virgin Mary, which I think we can do this another time. The history of Mary is related in the Quran. And the traditions of the prophet is taken almost entirely from apocryphal gospels and works. But I think we can tackle that next time. We can call it a night here, right? On the theory of the 7 slippers of Ephesus, because the dog ate one. I think that's the most credible version. What do you guys think?
That works for me.
It actually makes more sense than lots of the other stories in the Quran, to be fair.
And they did find a leather
I'm not 100% sure, certain that this story was written by the same guy who wrote the rest of the Quran. Anyway, this the Surah 18, Surah Al-Kahf, is a rather strange composition. It's not like any of the other surahs. In the case of Moses and the fish, for example, I'm now pretty convinced that wasn't written by the same guy who wrote the story of Dhul-Qarnayn, because Dhul-Qarnayn tries to imply that the figure Dhul-Qarnayn is Moses, has Moses' attributes, because Moses was depicted with 2 horns, and Alexander the Great had 2 horns, and he didn't like the idea that he was using a pagan in this story. So to gloss over the fact that it was a story about a pagan, he called him the man with 2 horns, knowing that the audience were going to accept this as being Moses. So if he does that, it makes absolutely no sense that he would take another Alexander legend and explicitly say that the guy is called Moses a few verses earlier, because that completely ruins his point about being ambiguous in the Dhul-Qarnayn version. That's one reason. There's another reason as well, which is that Dhul-Qarnayn is the mighty warrior. It's about Safa and Marwa. I'll go back there because he wants to present himself as a guy who's going to capture Jerusalem. Alexander the Great had Jerusalem surrendered to him on Mount Safa, which is why the Quran author is quite fond of having an Alexander legend, because he sees himself as having Jerusalem surrendered to him in due course.
Okay,
so he likes this big, powerful role. And of course, the Quran author likes to portray himself as a new Moses as well. So the new Alexander is a new Moses. He's a man, and it's all gonna fall into his hand like a ripe fruit. And again, it makes absolutely no sense to have the story of Moses Moses and the fish, because that is all about how Alexander missed out on eternal life. It was his cook Andreas who falls into the font of immortality, and it is the loyal servant who gets immortality, and Alexander misses out on it. And I'm sure that was written after Muhammad had died and failed to get Jerusalem. Yeah. So if Moses and the fish is a later shoe-in after the death of Muhammad, which is what I think, then that puts a certain cloud of suspicion over the other stories, which include Moses and the
Bain Best mentions a point, something I don't have the details, I cannot remember, but there is, people have said something that the word dog could be a scribal error, a mistake, a misunderstanding, and could refer to something else as well. So that's something that might be worth researching and talking about next time, or maybe have Odon do it. I think he's spoken about it. So yeah,
I think if I can comment on that one, I think Gabriel Said Reynolds draws attention to the fact that it refers to the Jacob of Saru refers to the sleepers as sheep or lambs. There's little lambs or something going to be protected, and so Gabriel Said Reynolds interprets the dog as a sheepdog to link in with the fact that the sleepers are referred to as lambs by Jacob of Saru. Sounds plausible to me, but
right, yeah. So I think we can call it a night here. Paul dropped off. I did him, but no feedback.
I think my main point is I think Tisdale's being I don't think he seems to regard it all as nonsense, the Quran, and it takes a lightweight view of it. I think the more you look at it, there's more going on there that he's not aware of, and he's fallen a little bit into the trap of mocking something, for having no understanding. But that he doesn't fully understand himself. What I would. To
JC's point, as far as I know, Tisdall doesn't take the Quran that seriously, or even Muhammad. I don't think he falls in the camp, but I think he's treating their story as he's using their story and then saying, okay, fine, you say this, let's have a look at it, and then he's interrogating it that way, taking the rules at face value and showing it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, perhaps we can call it a night here and then pick this up again another time. We'll be back next week and continue with this, because I think it's worth discussing. And also we come with hindsight. We have more information now, and we can probably find more resources and sources. All right.
Okay.
God bless you guys. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So, guys, yeah, thank you all very much to the audience. Thanks very much for joining us. Paul and Husain and JC. Thanks all, guys. Good night. God bless.
Bye. See you.